Bit like Groundhog Day for me. It wasn't long ago that Helen Zille and I had a chat at the BizNews Conference. This was after she had been flayed in public by Herman Mashaba and Gayton MacKenzie in the morning of the event, and then that evening came back with a brilliant riposte. Well, we'll see if the riposte today is just as brilliant, coming back after all of the allegations have been thrown around on the collapse of the Moonshot Pact, or so it seems, after what went on in Johannesburg last week. There we go, Helen. Big expectations. Helen Zille is the chair of the DA's Federal Council. You weren't actually in the discussions in Johannesburg, but what the other members of the Rainbow Coalition or the Moonshot Pact or whatever it is, and the anti-ANC parties say is that whatever they discuss there is irrelevant. It has to come back to you, and then you sit on the sidelines and say either yay or nay. Is that true? And rather, let me just sit here and listen, and you can give us your side of the story on exactly how the DA experienced what happened last week.
Thank you very much, Alec, for always being fair and for always allowing all sides to be heard. It is deeply appreciated. Yes, you're quite right. As you said, I wasn't on the Johannesburg negotiating team. It was headed up by Solly Msimanga, our Gauteng leader, and Fred Nell, our Gauteng chairperson, and one of my deputies, Thomas Walters. And you're also right that in the DA, all of the decisions on coalitions and similar things have to be taken by the federal executive, not by me. I'm a useful lightning rod. I'm a useful punch bag for people, and it doesn't worry me at all. I do chair the federal executive, but I'm not a dictator. I'm not an autocrat. We discuss issues from every perspective, and then the body as a whole takes a decision. Now, I think I should begin by saying Johannesburg is only one of around 20 coalitions that we have throughout South Africa, most of which are working very, very well indeed. Johannesburg has been the biggest and most important exception. And it fails for a particular reason. It fails because a party that is needed to get a majority by either the ANC or ourselves has the balance of power, but has never voted with us, never voted once with us, has always voted with the ANC and the EFF, and they were expecting us to try and, for the third time or fourth time, to build a stable coalition on the basis of their word, which we did not accept, that they would vote with us. Now, where we go into coalition, even when it's very, very difficult, like in Tshwane, where we have a wafer-thin majority, and it is incredibly difficult to get anything passed, including a budget, we nevertheless try. We have Celia Brink doing yeoman service there and doing his very best. The odds are stacked against us, but where there is even a glimmer of hope, we try. In Nelson Mandela Bay, exactly the same thing. There's a 10-party coalition where our Retief Odendaal is the mayor, doing an absolutely brilliant job, and today beat back a meeting at which there was going to be a motion of no confidence in him. So the point I'm making is, wherever there's a chance, we try. We've come to the conclusion that because of our direct experience in Johannesburg of the Patriotic Alliance, that there is no chance of establishing a stable coalition with them in the fold. Now, let me tell you why. They will make all kinds of promises and protestations, and we've included them on the basis of those promises and protestations twice in our coalition. You'll remember at first they voted with the ANC at the end of 2021. At the beginning of 2022, they wanted to be joining our coalition and wanted to come back and demanded a make-o position, to which we acceded. And we brought them in, and we had a signed coalition agreement. So we thought, great, they're on board now. They promised that they would stay the course to 2026. About 6 weeks later, there was a motion of no confidence in the DA Speaker, Vasco da Gama. What did the PA do? they voted with the ANC and EFF to remove our speaker, even though they were part of our coalition. And they used that turmoil to try and negotiate a better deal for themselves under the threat that they would leave if we didn't give it to them. Then the ANC brought a motion of no confidence, or the ANC coalition, one of the smaller parties, brought a motion of no confidence in Mpho. And despite the fact that Gayton and the PA were part of our coalition, they voted with the ANC and EFF to get rid of Mpho. When we could prove that that vote was irregular, Mpho was restored. And when there was another vote, yet again, the PA voted with the ANC and EFF against Mpho. Now, we had introduced them to our coalition not once, but twice, despite the fact that they'd never voted for us, despite the most committed promises that they made to stay the course, despite even offering us 10 million rand, which we turned down, as a guarantee that they would stay the course. And yet every time they had the opportunity to do so, they voted with the ANC and EFF. Now, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And in the very last round, this last Friday, Action South Africa and the other smaller parties brought into the PA's promise that the PA would vote with them. And their strategy was, and they told us as much, that they would beat us in the first round of voting, in which no one would get above 50%. That they would beat us and we would fall out, and then the runoff would be between the ANC and EFF and the other smaller parties in the coalition, with a PA who would vote with them. That was their entire strategy was based on. We said, you're being played. The PA is not going to vote with you. We are not going to fall out in the first round because you're being bluffed again. And what happened? They were played. The Patriotic Alliance did not vote with Action South Africa and the Freedom Front Plus. And in fact, their vote gave the ANC and EFF again an overall majority. So every time the PA has made a solemn commitment to vote with us, in the first coalition we had with them, in the second coalition we were negotiating with them, and now again with Action SA and the Freedom Front Plus, every time they've actually had to go to the vote, they voted with the ANC and EFF. So they just play us like a fiddle. They're also in coalition with the ANC in at least, I did a count, at least 11 other municipalities across South Africa. Now this gives the ANC massive leverage over the PA, because the ANC can say, if you don't do as we're telling you, in Johannesburg, we're going to kick you out of all these 11 coalitions that we have with you. So that's why you can be sure the PA will always dance to the ANC's tune.
Sure. Well, that does put a different perspective on it. Herman Mashaba said that the plug was pulled by the DA at the last minute, that everybody had agreed to vote for your candidate, for Mpho, but that the DA came in and said, we're only going to accept this, including the Patriotic Alliance voting with them, we'd only accept this if you join us in the other municipalities around South Africa. That's what Herman says.
No, Herman is totally wrong. There was never, ever any suggestion that they would vote for Mpho. There was never any suggestion of that. In fact, on Thursday night, when we were doing the last-minute negotiation before the vote on a Friday, while the PA was saying, we made such a huge mistake in going with the ANC and the EFF, please let us in again. But instead of being humble and saying, we'll come in on the terms we had before, they said, we'll come back in, but you must make Kenny Kunene the mayor. And when we absolutely objected, they basically said, well, then we'll go with another mayor. But the bottom line is they started with a demand that Gayton be the mayor, and almost everybody rejected that because we know exactly what would happen if he were. But then they had till late on Thursday night the demand that Kenny Kunene be the mayor. There was never an agreement at any time that Mpho would be the mayor. Otherwise, we would have gone for it. We nominated Mpho. So it makes complete sense that if they had all said, we're going to vote for Mpho, they could have voted for Mpho. But we said to the PA, if you want us to believe that you are serious about joining this coalition and staying the course with us, if you're serious, and you've broken your word 3 times before and never once, not once, have you voted with us in Johannesburg, if you're serious about that, you need to show that you're prepared to move out of the ambit of the ANC. Otherwise, they will always have leverage on you, as they've shown in the past. And they were not prepared to do that, which showed us they were bluffing. And the fact that they were bluffing was immediately exposed on the Friday, when Action SA and the Freedom Front Plus and the other smaller parties went in thinking they would beat the DA in the first round, and then we would be forced to choose between the smaller coalition parties with the PA against the ANC EFF. That didn't happen at all, and we knew it wouldn't happen. We knew they were being played, and they were. In fact, the PA joined the ANC and gave them a majority in the first round.
What would have happened if the PA had voted with Action South Africa? And in fact, the whole strategy as being suggested had occurred. Would the Democratic Alliance then have supported their candidate against the ANC's one?
Well, could have, would have, should have. I mean, could haves in politics are meaningless. We knew it wouldn't happen.
So when John Steenhuisen was re-elected leader of the Democratic Alliance, he had in his acceptance speech, he referred to the Moonshot Pact, and there was a lot of excitement around it. Now that Moonshot Pact was supposed to work leg 1 in Johannesburg, it clearly hasn't. Is that the end of the Moonshot Pact?
No, Johannesburg was never meant to be leg 1 of the Moonshot Pact. In fact, the Moonshot Pact has not been sacrificed in Johannesburg. The Moonshot Pact is the solution to the mess in Johannesburg. Because Johannesburg is what happens when people without consultation at all put in unilateral motions of no confidence and then seek to try and vote first and negotiate later to put other people under pressure to support the outcomes that they want. So nothing is prepared, nothing is strategized. It is vote now, negotiate later. We know how hard these negotiations are, and it is impossible to vote for an executive mayor and then pretend to negotiate the shape of government, the objectives of government, the composition of government after a mayor has been selected. That's a recipe for ungovernability for months and months. The Moonshot Pact precisely is to avoid this in 2024. The Moonshot Pact wants to start right now with all parties who are opposed to the ANC EFF to get together and to plan for a year on how we get this together, so that we don't sit being taken by surprise by hidden agendas to seek to drive through a pre-described outcome and then break up when not everybody agrees to your terms. It's the Moonshot Pact that is precisely there to avoid a mess like Johannesburg.
For those of us sitting on the sidelines, it's terribly frustrating. Johannesburg is in a downward spiral. It appeared as though there was an opportunity here to reverse the awful governance that is now being perpetuated with yet another member of Al Jamaah. I'm not sure how many members they have. Is it 3?
They have 3.
But now one of the other. So they have 3 members, 3 out of 270. And they're now getting a second mayor of the richest metro in South Africa. What do you say to those people? Because Frans Cronje had some very interesting insights. He first of all called it, we're in the loopkak phase, which really doesn't sound very nice. And secondly, he said that there is so much unhappiness and so much confrontation between the opposition political parties that come the next election, well, maybe a lot of people who would have moved away from the ANC aren't going to.
Well, you can't look at Johannesburg, as important as it is, and make a general conclusion. As I say, we have approximately 20 coalitions across the country, and we're about to take over another one now. And we've won 2 governments back during this particular time, in fact 3. And they were working fine. Ironically, the common denominator of where things tend to go badly is when we have Action South Africa and the PA in the mix. That is when things, unfortunately, go badly. But it is absolutely true that it is insane that a party that can't even get 2% of the vote, around 1% of the vote, as Al-Jamal got, should, in 2 successive mayoral elections, be able to put forward the candidate. And, of course, the DA is on the front line with a solution. We've proposed threshold legislation in Parliament, which would say that if a party can't get 2% of the vote in any sphere of government, then they don't get any seats at all. Now, any country with a proportional representation system, as South Africa has, any country that has coalitions that arise out of proportional representation systems inevitably, they all have thresholds of support. In Germany, the threshold is quite high. It's 5%. Now, if the German threshold had applied, there would probably have been 4 parties in Johannesburg that made the grade. In Denmark, the threshold is 2%. In that case, about 6 parties in Johannesburg would have made the grade. Currently, there are about 28 parties in Johannesburg because there are no thresholds. I think it's either 28 or 25. I did the count some while ago. Now, trying to put coalitions together with 6 parties, 3 of which would have fallen on the DA side of the fence and 3 of which would have fallen on the ANC side of the fence, is a completely different ballgame. There you can talk about manageable coalitions, and there you can talk about having signed agreements that perhaps hold water. The PA is quite honest. They say that the signed agreements are absolutely meaningless to them and they'll go where their interest lies. And they've said that repeatedly all the time. But if we'd had just a threshold of 2%, it would have looked entirely different. In Nelson Mandela Bay, where there are also scores of tiny parties, we were trying to run a 10-party coalition. If there'd been a threshold of just 2%, it would have been a 2-party coalition. That shows you how much these minuscule parties actually wag the dog. And these tiny parties that can't even get 1% of the vote often then decide who is going to be the mayor, the ANC or the DA. Now, that is not democratic politics. And that is why the threshold legislation is so necessary. We've proposed it, we're the champions of it in Parliament, and we're driving it through. And we think that that will do a lot to stabilize coalitions. It's tragic that Johannesburg is the one place that is a train wreck. It is our economic hub. And obviously, no politician will ever blame the voters, and I don't. They can make any choice they like. But if the voters of Johannesburg are only going to give the DA 26% and are going to spread their vote and fragment their vote across a myriad tiny parties, then I'm afraid there's a limit to the miracles that we can pull out of a hat. There's a limit to those miracles. We can do it, and we're trying in Nelson Mandela Bay, although the odds are heavily stacked against us. Ditto in Tshwane. But in Johannesburg, the odds are just too heavily against us because the voters, in their wisdom, gave the PA the balance of power. And that makes it extremely difficult because the PA will always, when push comes to shove, default to the ANC because the ANC is prepared to indulge in extortion politics, and we are not.
Frans Cronje made some very interesting points in our conversation, and he was very intimately involved in all the discussions in Johannesburg going in the negotiations.
Not with us. His
view was that, not with you, but certainly on the other side. But his view is that the future of politics is not going to be the 51% winner deciding what everybody else does, but that South Africa is moving into a permanent situation of coalitions. Would you go along with that? Would you go into have a view that the old Westminster system of 51% and the one that we see in the United States is not working terribly well will be superseded or changed by a better system of coalitions?
Alec, that's not a new insight. I mean, I've been in coalitions since 1999, and I headed up a 7-party coalition in 2006. It's axiomatic that if you have proportional representation systems, you are going to have coalitions. We can't have a Westminster system because we don't have a constituency-based system. So, since 1994, we have not had a Westminster system, except that we've had a hybrid type of system at local government. So it's axiomatic that with a proportional representation system, you're always going to get coalitions. And the first one was here in the Western Cape, short-lived between the DP and the NNP. The next one was the one that I led in Cape Town with a 7-party coalition, enormously challenging, but we held it together and we delivered and we showed the DA difference, and then we won the province with an outright majority 3 years later. So those outright majorities are rare, but people saw the vast difference that our coalition made in Cape Town in 2006. And so we did get an overall majority, and that has remained until now. We don't ever take it for granted, or we're never complacent, but it is rare to get an overall majority. But, as I said before, when coalitions are the order of the day, fragmentation of the political scene is inevitable, and all countries with workable coalition systems based on proportional representation have thresholds. And unless we introduce thresholds too, and a limit on the number of motions of no confidence you can do in a particular period, our system of proportional representation will be rendered totally ungovernable, including at national level. And the Constitutional Court's ruling that independence must be allowed to stand is just going to increase that problem. I mean, you can get many, many individuals who are disappointed candidates who didn't make it for one of the bigger parties, then standing as an individual and having a situation where there's a literal Tower of Babel, unless there is some sort of threshold legislation in place.
And we, the voters, stand on the outside watching all of this, getting increasingly frustrated by a country that is going through growth pains? Is that what you put it down to?
No, the voters don't sit by being frustrated. They get the vote. They choose these parties, and they choose the configuration that we end up with. Now, the DA has currently 16 overall majorities, so the era of overall majorities isn't over. We've got 16 mayors in true blue coalitions, and we are hoping to go for another one now coming in another crucial municipality for us where we face 3 by-elections. So yes, while it's very rare to get an overall majority in a proportional representation system, the DA has done it. And that is where people have true blue government. Look what's happened in Umgeni, how excited people are there, and what strides we're making because we don't have to hold together these impossible coalitions. If you take a look at Midvaal, which has been a long-standing example, and across the Western Cape, I mean, one of our primary examples is Mossel Bay, which has been crowned the Town of the Year in South Africa, and several others. So it is absolutely possible, but less and less likely, that is true. But we can have stable coalitions as well, as we do in many, many places. But in Johannesburg, the configuration that the voters gave us was extremely difficult, and you can't say that we haven't tried. We've tried 3 times. We've been betrayed 3 times. And there is an old saying that goes, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." And we were not only fooled twice, we were fooled 3 times. And Action SA and the Freedom Front Plus have been fooled 4 times. because the PA promised to vote for them in the first round in the election on Friday and, of course, didn't.
Helen Zille is the chair of the DA's Federal Council, and I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.